Tommy. And he was born with the most perfect head of curly strawberry blonde hair.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter Red, and on this episode, Brooke is telling the story of her son Tommy, who was stillborn at 36 weeks. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also, be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partners, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us. Thank you so much, Brooke, for being on the podcast today. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
So I am a stay-at-home mom. I have 2 kids. I have a 5-year-old named Connor and a 3-year-old. She's 3. She's not quite 4. A 3-year-old named Winnie, and then our Tommy. We're pretty vanilla, boring people.
I hardly doubt that.
We love to eat and we go out to eat a lot. Yeah, there's not a lot to us. But
And your husband is?
He's the donut critic.
He's the donut critic.
Yeah, he runs an Instagram account about all the sweets and treats in Utah
and
beyond.
And beyond. That's awesome. And so you love food. It seems like you like to travel a bit too, don't you?
We love to travel.
Yeah.
I'm happiest when I have a plane ticket in my name.
Which is kind of fun, actually.
It really is. I don't have one right now, and it's like kind of an itch I need to scratch.
And where were you living at the time of Tommy's birth?
And we just moved to Lehi,
Utah.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
And so that's just a little suburb of
Utah County.
So, yeah. I was like, I'm not told. People are like, where?
Yeah. It's just a little town. We'd moved here from Mill Creek, so it was like polar opposite.
Yeah.
But we've been really, really happy here.
That's great. And just for context, how long ago was Tommy's birth of the time of this recording?
So at the time of this recording, we are a week away from his birthday.
So you haven't even hit his first birthday yet.
We haven't.
Oh, okay. Well then, and then, so you have your husband, Ben, and then Connor and Winnie.
Yep.
And how did this pregnancy go? How did Tommy's pregnancy go?
It was pretty typical. It was super similar to my others. I mean, I'd maybe had like slight hiccups throughout it, but nothing that was ever worrisome or a big deal. Connor and Winnie are only 19 months apart, which was very ambitious of us. So we knew we wanted a bigger space between Winnie and the next baby. So they would have been about just under 3 years apart.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'd had a really normal pregnancy. People have called me like a pregnancy unicorn.
Oh,
like,
you're one of those.
The first trimester is always terrible, but then after that, like I have really great pregnancies.
Really pretty easy.
Yeah.
And you never had any issues with any of your other kids, right? Pregnancy?
No. I mean, we had like some slight delivery complications with Connor, but I mean, nothing super worrisome or out of the blue. He just aspirated fluid.
Oh, okay.
So super common.
It happens.
Yeah. But other than that, textbook perfect pregnancies across the board. Nothing we'd ever been concerned about or worried that anything would be different than it had been.
Right. And you guys didn't have any issues getting pregnant, right?
No, we are very lucky.
Yeah.
Connor took us a little while, but after that,
it was fine.
Yeah, things started working and we can get pregnant very easily, which is lucky. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
I'll never take that for granted.
Yeah, for sure. I know a little bit about your stories, but I want to kind of just take a step back and kind of rewind to Christmas Day last year. Tell us what happened on Christmas.
It was actually a few days before Christmas. I'd had what felt like a pinched nerve in my groin, but I was like 34 weeks pregnant and I mean, by the end, everything hurts and aches. And I kind of just attributed it to like the baby getting bigger. It was probably just, putting weight on a different spot of my body. So I hadn't thought much of it, and I was just trying to manage the pain. So that was probably like 3 or 4 days before Christmas. And then by Christmas Eve, I was pretty miserable. I was in quite a bit of pain. I was having a hard time walking because it hurt so bad. I'd even called my OBGYN that day on Christmas Eve, and I said, like, I'm having pain. And he's like, well, yeah, you're 35 weeks pregnant. Like, that happens.
Yeah.
And he had no reason to think otherwise.
Anything else was an issue.
So that night we'd gotten our kids in bed, and I was working on setting up some gifts, and I had knelt down to do something. And when I went to stand back up, it was the weirdest thing. My leg just like gave out, and it was like instant, like throbbing pain. I couldn't put any weight on it. I couldn't stand. Like, I was literally like wailing, screaming at my husband. My leg hurt so bad.
Oh.
So he's like, it's probably like a Charlie horse or a muscle spasm or something. Honestly, by the end of pregnancy, everything
is painful.
Weird things start happening to your body. So he had said, let's go upstairs. Let's get you in the bath. Like, maybe the hot water will help. Yeah. Like, with your muscles or whatever it was.
And where was the pain in your leg?
It was my entire leg.
Your entire leg?
Yeah. It just, honestly, it hurt so bad. Like, I couldn't even think straight. It was the strangest thing. So I couldn't put any weight on it. My husband literally carried me upstairs, and he went in the bathroom and started filling up the bathtub. And I sat on the bed, and I started to pull down my pants, and I looked at my left leg, and it was turning purple, and it was like swelling really quickly. So I instantly started yelling at him, like, something is really, really wrong. Like, we need to get to a hospital. Yeah. And so he's like, okay, let's go. So we unlocked our front door. Our kids were asleep in bed, but I just knew we needed to get to a hospital. So we unlocked our front door, and we started like texting neighbors and family, trying to find someone
just to come.
Yeah, here. To come be with the kids, because we didn't even know what to expect. So I got a hold of a neighbor, and she came over, and then we got a hold of Ben's brother, and he was like, I'll go over, I'll grab the kids, whatever. So as we were driving to the hospital, I was in so much pain. Like, I was kind of drifting in and out of like being conscious, just because like the pain was so excruciating. And I kept telling my husband, I was like, I don't want to lose my leg. Like, I was so worried that something was happening, that they were going to have to like amputate my leg. Right. But I had like, nothing was clicking as to like what was going on. It was so bizarre. So we got to the hospital, and we were waiting at the ER, and they're like, you're pregnant. We're just going to send you right up to labor and delivery.
Oh, okay.
I think they probably thought I was in labor.
Oh.
Just because I was in a lot of pain. I don't know. It was weird. They didn't even want me in the ER. They sent me right up to labor and delivery. So they got me situated in a triage room, and they took one look at my leg, and they called a rapid response. And which, if you don't know what that means, it essentially means the hospital call goes out, and they request someone from every single department to be there. Yeah. Because something's really wrong. Yeah. So within like a matter of minutes, our room was completely filled with doctors and nurses. And I remember seeing a security guard and being like, what's he doing here? Like,
everybody was there.
Everyone was there. And they said, like, you have a really severe blood clot. We think you're having a pulmonary embolism, and we need you to lay as still as possible. And I remember looking over at my husband and saying, like, please don't let me die. And he grabbed my hand, and he's like, it's going to be okay. I was like, but I don't want to die. Like, I just kept telling him that, like, please don't let me die. So they gave me an IV, and they got morphine in my system, which helped so much. And kind of once they got that pain under control, they realized that I wasn't, thank heavens, I wasn't having a pulmonary embolism.
Oh, good.
But my breathing was so irregular because of the amount of pain that I was in. Right. So they came in, and they did an ultrasound on my leg, and I had a blood clot from my high femoral artery. So at the very top of my groin, all the way down to my ankle, and the vein was like 100% coagulated. Yeah. Oh. And so we were at American Fork Hospital, which is a smaller hospital than some. And the hospitalist who was over everything just said, like, this is kind of beyond what we treat. So by 12 a.m. Christmas morning, I was in an operating room and they replaced a filter into my chest to catch any clot. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a pulmonary embolism.
Yeah.
And then we spent the night in the ICU, and in the morning, the labor and delivery nurses came down and they were kind of monitoring Tommy's heart rate.
Yeah.
And it was a little low. They weren't overly concerned, but they were watching it.
Okay.
And so the hospitalist came back in, and there was a new one by now. And he just said, like, we don't feel comfortable or confident having you here with like the severity of your blood clot and how pregnant you are. So he said, like, we're going to transfer you to a different hospital that has maternal fetal medicine and just kind of like more infrastructure to help. So a doctor actually came up from maternal fetal medicine, and they did an ultrasound on Tommy that day. And she looked at him and said, he looks perfect. He's growing ahead of schedule. Like, everything looks so good. If it was my decision, we will deliver. So we were like, oh, I guess we're having a Christmas baby. Like, here we go. This is way sooner than we thought. But like,
yeah,
if that's what we need to do to get him here safely, then so be it. So they left me up in labor and delivery just in case they needed to do an emergency C-section. I was where I needed to be. But then the Life Flight team came and they transported me by ambulance to IMC. And we were under the impression that we would get there and we were going to deliver.
Yeah.
So we got there and we met with the team of specialists there, and the maternal fetal doctors ultimately decided that they didn't want to deliver.
Was there any reason that they gave you?
They had mentioned that they felt as though it could be better if the clot had more time to stabilize. They did another ultrasound of my leg, and my body was responding really well to the blood thinners. Mm-hmm. And he was still doing really well. So they thought, if we can keep you on blood thinners, stabilize the blood clot, give him a little more time to grow, then it's like in everyone's best interest, which it's one of those things looking back, like I just can't think about.
Yeah.
It's a decision that's like, it haunts us whenever we think about it. And what was hard was what was best for me wasn't ideal for Tommy, and what was ideal for Tommy wasn't best for me.
Right. Because Tommy at this time was 35.
Yeah, 35 to the day.
Okay. So he was 35 to the day. That is just a little earlier to then being term. And
so had this been 2 weeks later, they probably just would have delivered him.
For sure.
But since he was still considered premature, I think the ultimate goal was
try and
keep him in there as long as possible. Mm-hmm. So we met with a thrombosis specialist, and he felt confident in the decision. Maternal fetal felt really good about the decision. So we were just like, okay, you guys are the doctors and the professionals, and we trusted.
Yeah.
And we still do. We still believe that, given the information at the time, the best decision was made.
Yeah.
Because obviously they didn't have a crystal ball, and they had no way of knowing what would happen. So that was all Christmas Day. The 26th, we knew we were going to be discharged, but they wanted me to do a non-stress test that day.
Okay.
Just to make sure everything still looked good. So we did a non-stress test that day, and his heart rate still was maybe on like the lower end, but like low normal. Nothing. I mean, that was the extent. Like, it's low normal, but he's still in a healthy range. So we said, okay. And we talked to my OBGYN, and he said, like, oh, we'll have you come in a couple days and we'll do another non-stress test and make sure everything looks good.
Yeah.
So we went home, and the next week was really hard. I was really depressed. I was really concerned about going into spontaneous labor because of being on blood thinners. I knew I couldn't have an epidural if I did.
Yeah.
And I am an epidural. I want drugs when I'm having a baby. More power to the women that don't, but like, I want drugs.
Yeah. You know you. It's good.
So I was really, really concerned about spontaneous labor and not being able to get an epidural.
Right.
And it was just all felt really heavy. Like I remember saying to my husband, I just hate knowing there's something in my body that could kill me. Like it just felt really scary.
Yeah.
So and I was still in so much physical pain. I guess it's something I never knew about a blood clot, but they are incredibly painful.
Yeah.
And so I could still like barely walk. And luckily my husband had some time off work. So he was home to help me with kids. And it was just kind of a dark week. It just felt big and heavy and sad. And I had even posted on Instagram the day we were in the hospital. And I said, like, I was so grateful for medicine and the doctors. And I said, like, and I'm so grateful for this baby's resilience to all the medical intervention my body has required. And I knew everything I needed was a strain on him.
Yeah.
And that was like hard too.
To think about. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got through that week and it was New Year's Day. And my husband was like, hey, what if we take the kids to go see a movie? And I was like, great. I've hardly been out of the house over this last week. So let's go do something fun with the kids. So we went and saw Ralph Breaks the Internet. And we got home and I was super tired. I was 36 weeks pregnant.
Yeah.
By now. And I just said to my husband, like, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to take a nap. And he was like, great. So I did. And then a couple hours later, I came back downstairs and I was sitting on the couch and I was on my phone doing something. And I just had like this pit in my stomach. And I thought, I haven't felt Tommy move in a long time, which I've always worried about that with my babies.
Yeah.
And I've always been able to get them to move.
Okay.
More or less, like even if I've just, it's always just stressed me out so bad with all three of my babies.
Yeah.
So I drank some juice. I ate some dinner. I laid on my side and I just couldn't feel anything. And even when I had worried about it with my other babies, I feel like I could feel something.
Yeah.
Maybe not a lot, but like enough to be like, okay.
They're fine.
Yeah. Like I'm just being super paranoid. So I laid on my side and I was like, I don't feel anything. So I was like, I'm going to get in the tub because he loved when I was in the tub and he'd always move so much when I was in the bathtub.
Yeah.
So I was in the tub and I was like, I still just like nothing. So I got back out, I laid on the bed and my husband was downstairs doing kids and I called him up and I'm like, I'm actually like legitimately concerned. It's been a long time. I've done all the things and he's not moving. And very uncharacteristically of my husband, he said like, okay, let's go to labor and delivery. We'll get him checked. I'm sure everything's fine. So we had our kids who were 2 and 4 at the time. And we thought like, we're going to go in. Everything's going to be fine. We'll come home. Like, no big deal. We'll just take them with us.
Right.
You never really assume the worst has happened. And so while we were driving there, I said to my husband, do you think everything's okay? And he's like, I'm inclined to think it is. And I can just remember the whole drive thinking, I don't think it's okay. Like just in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking like something is wrong.
Yeah.
So we got into labor and delivery and they got me in a triage room. And I told her what had happened and she's like, okay, we'll get him checked.
And how long, when do you remember feeling him last?
That morning I had felt him.
Okay.
Not like huge movements. Like, sometimes they move and like it almost jars your whole body. Like I hadn't felt that probably until the night before. Yeah. On New Year's Eve, we had watched Bird Box. And I could feel him move a lot through that movie. I remember sitting there and I remember feeling so grateful that night. Like just feeling like just thinking how incredible it is to feel your baby move. Yeah. And then I had kind of felt him that morning. So this was about 7:30 on New Year's evening. Okay. And so the nurse was like, okay, we'll get it checked. And she started doing the ultrasound and I could tell pretty quick she was having a difficult time finding his heart rate because we had been in labor and delivery the week before.
A lot.
Yeah. And we'd had like non-stress tests and ultrasounds, and like right off the bat, everyone could always find his heartbeat super quick. And I could tell quickly she wasn't picking it up. And I remember looking at my husband across the room and just like the look on his face, because I think he felt it too. And she kept trying, and she's like, oh, I think I have it. She's like, it's 120. And when she said that, I was like, that's got to be my heart rate. Like, that seems low. She's like, well, let me keep working. And then she's like, I'm going to go get another nurse. And she walked out of the room, and it was just like the most surreal feeling. Like my husband and I we didn't even say anything. Like, I don't think either one of us knew what to say, but we just like kept staring at each other like,
what's happening?
Yeah, this can't be real. Like, this isn't happening. So another nurse came back in, and they worked for a few more minutes. And finally the other nurse just looked at me, and she's like, I am so sorry. I can't find anything. And it was just surreal is the only word I can think of. Like, you hear about it happening and you're always afraid of it happening, but you never in a million years think that's going to be us.
Yeah.
And like,
it'll happen to you.
Yeah. And I feel like every doctor's appointment we went into, I mean, you always think like, what if there isn't a heartbeat? But like in your gut, you're always like, it's okay. There's going to be one. It's fine.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, we had our kids in the room with us, and the nurses took them out, and my husband and I just held each other, and we just sobbed. And it was just, I don't know. It was just the worst thing ever, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, there aren't even other words for it. It's just, it was the worst. And they said, like, we'll have an ultrasound technician come in and do a final ultrasound. We'll contact your OBGYN and we'll start making decisions. And then we sat there and we're like, how do we tell our families? What do we say?
Yeah.
Like, and it was just so surreal putting into words what we had just experienced. And so I remember I texted my mom and I was like, I can't talk right now, but we're at the hospital and we just found out we lost our baby. And like, of course, the first thing she did was call me.
Yep.
And we both text out to our families, and I text my sisters and I just said, like, we're so heartbroken, but we just found out we lost our baby. And I had text my sister who lives really close to Riverton Hospital, which is where we were delivering. And I just said, like, we just found out we lost our baby. Like, can you come grab the kids from us? They're here with us, and we need someone to come get them. And like, I'll never forget the nurse opening the door and seeing her out in the hallway. Like, she was there so quick to come get him. And my brother texted me within like 5 minutes of sending the text. And he said, I'm on my way. And I said, you're welcome to come. There's nothing to do. But he lives in Bountiful. So he had a long drive down, and my parents were in St. George at the time. And they said, like, we'll come right now. And I was like, no, you don't need to. There's like nothing to do. Like, get a good night's sleep and come up in the morning. And I got a text from like midnight from them saying, like, we're on our way. Like, we just can't sit here.
Yeah.
And so my brother was so nice. He drove to our house to get like my hospital bag. And because I was on blood thinners, they couldn't induce me right away. And so we decided to stay the night in the hospital just in case any complications came up with my clot, that I was where I would need to be.
And how was your clot doing at that time? Was it still responding?
Yeah. I mean, my leg was still super swollen, super painful, but it wasn't getting worse.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of like all we could have hoped for by that point. Yeah. So my OBGYN did come in that night, and he was so sweet. And we came up with a game plan we all felt good about. And one of the things that stuck out to me the most was, he said, so we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he is as well. And he said, like, every morning I pray that I'll be inspired to be aware of problems that I might miss otherwise. And he's like, it's really hard for me when these things happen because I just feel like I missed something.
Yeah.
And he just was so sad for us. And it meant so much to us that like, it wasn't this routine process for him, that like he understood what we were feeling and like the scope and magnitude of the loss we were feeling.
Yeah.
And like, I remember sitting in the hospital room and just kept thinking like, this isn't real. Like, this can't be happening. This doesn't happen to us. Like, just over and over and over again, thinking this isn't real. Like, it was this weird vortex we were in. So anyways, that night, two of my sisters came to the hospital and my brother, and it was really good to see them and spend some time with them that night. And we really just appreciated having, I feel like my husband and I didn't even know what to say to each other. So to have other people felt just really good for both of us.
Good.
Well, I shouldn't say for both of us, but for me at least.
Yeah. It felt comforting to have them there.
Yeah. So we spent the night in the hospital, and that morning our nurse, we had a new nurse by the morning, and she said, you know, we're going to get things started soon. And I asked if I could take a bath before. I love baths, apparently. But she had said, I'd asked if I could take a bath, and she was like, yep, that's just fine. And when you're done, we'll get everything started. And she's like, I would encourage you to take one last picture of your stomach before you deliver.
Oh.
So I did. And I'm glad I have it. But every time I look at it, it's kind of, it's a sad photo.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it was about 8 a.m. They got me started on Pitocin. And then maybe about 10, they gave me an epidural. And then by about noon, they broke my water.
Yeah.
And it was a really slow process. I mean, my body wasn't ready for delivery, so it wasn't moving super fast. And I think the most surreal part of that day was my mom and dad had gotten there earlier that morning, and we were just talking, and a social worker came in to talk to my husband and I, and it was pretty routine stuff. And then she handed us a folder of a list of all the mortuaries in Utah. And she's like, this is the list. Like, numbers are here. You guys just make the decision and let us know. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like, here's a list of mortuaries, and we're supposed to pick one and decide where to bury our baby. Like, this is like the furthest thing from anything we imagined with his life. Like, it's the worst.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
Easily. It's the worst.
And I mean, I feel like my husband and I are pretty young, but like, we'd never thought about where we really wanted to be buried. And it felt like suddenly we needed to make that decision because I wanted to know I was going to be close to him.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, it was so surreal. So my dad was really sweet. He was there, and we had whittled it down to a couple that geographically made the most sense. Yeah. And he made some calls, and I remember even him coming back in and saying, well, a baby plot costs this much and an adult plot costs this much. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like, how am I, like, I don't want this to be a financial decision, but it's hard not to let it be.
Yeah.
And so anyways, we picked the mortuary, and slowly throughout the day, I progressed very slowly. And we had some friends and family in and out, but we hadn't told anyone other than our immediate family. Just, I don't know, we felt very protective over what we were experiencing.
Yeah.
So by about 6 that night, I wasn't going anywhere. I'd been stuck at a 7 for a while. And so I had said, like, can we try the peanut pillow? That's like a exercise ball that's literally shaped like a peanut. And they put it in between your knees. I had never heard of it either, but we did it with Winnie. And the nurse was like, this is either going to work really well or it's not going to work at all. And I went from like a 7 to fully complete in like 30 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah. So
you just put it between your legs, and it just the position.
I think it's how it like positions your cervix, that it kind of helps things move along. So I said, can we try that? And they were like, sure. So we did. And sure enough, it moved me right along. And by then, most of my siblings were there. Ben's parents live in St. George, and we had called them and said, like, if you want to come, we would love to have you. So they had driven up for the day. My mom and dad were there. So everyone was in the room. And my epidural was kind of starting to wear off. And I was worried about getting it redosed because I really wanted to get my legs moving again because I knew that was best for my blood clot.
Right.
So I was complete and I was like, oh my gosh, redose. Give me the epidural. Like, I'm in so much pain.
Oh.
And I had told everyone, like, when we deliver, I just want it to be Ben and I. I don't want anyone else in the room, obviously, except for like nurses and doctors.
Yeah.
But I just want it to be Ben and I. So I had asked everyone to leave the room and they said, like, by now I was like ready to push. And the nurse was like, you've got to just wait. Like, let the doctor get here. So he did. He came and it was thankfully it was a pretty easy delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And even one thing I was really grateful for is the nurses kept having me move a lot. So he looked really good when he came out because they were like, if you lay too long on one side, like he can kind of start to look funny because the blood isn't circulating.
Right.
So they were really sweet to keep me moving so Tommy would look as good as possible.
Oh, that is really smart.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I really appreciated it because I remember I started to push and I said to one of the nurses, is he going to look okay? Like, I was really afraid. Mm-hmm. Like, I just wanted to be ready. Like, I didn't want to be horrified when I saw my baby.
Right. You just want to mentally prepare.
Yeah.
yourself.
So I said, is he gonna look okay? And she said, he's going to come out and he's going to be perfect. So I started pushing, and like between every push, I just was like consciously telling myself, like, he's not going to cry. He's not going to cry. You're not going to hear anything. And sure enough, he came out and it was just silence. And I just sobbed. Like, I just hurt in a way I've never hurt before. And I never knew I could hurt. Like, it felt like actual physical pain. And I was just looking at him and he was so perfect. And he had this curly blonde hair, which is crazy because my husband and I are both really dark.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I was just begging him to like breathe, to move something. And honestly, it just like it was a physical pain to hold his lifeless body. Like, it just felt so unfair. And so the doctors and nurses were great. They got me cleaned up really fast and they left, and it was just Ben and I, and we just sobbed together. Like, I made noises I didn't even know could come out of my body, but I felt like the grief was like an actual physical reaction I was having.
Yeah.
And I remember I just kept saying how sorry I was that I didn't get him here. I told him over and over again, I was so sorry. And I remember Ben holding him and saying, like, what happened, bud? We were so close. And it was really surreal. Like, I feel like that's the only word I can keep coming back to. Like, I'll never forget the way holding his lifeless body felt. Like, it's too horrible to even like articulate what that feels like. Our kids were at the hospital and we knew we wanted him to come in soon after he was born because we knew his appearance would start to change really quickly. And we didn't want it to be upsetting for them to see him, you know. And we were really lucky. He looked really good. He did. He still had some good color to him, and he wasn't like malformed at all. Right. Which I've since talking to moms who have lost babies, like, I know that can happen with stillbirth. So I feel really grateful that he really did. He looked perfect. And my doctor even said, like, he's going to come out and he's going to be perfect. And we're all just going to shake our heads and wonder why. And that's like exactly how I felt. Like, he was absolutely perfect. So our kids came in. We spent some time with them. They didn't really want to hold him, and that was okay. We just wanted them to do whatever they were comfortable with, but they wanted to kind of touch him and look at him, and so we did. And then we let our parents come in, and then we had my siblings come in, and it it was heartbreaking, but it was a really sacred, like it was really sacred that time. It felt really good to share him. The little bit of him we got with our families, it just made him more real. And my husband gave him a blessing, which is something we do in our faith. And that was really hard. Normally when you hear blessings, they're like promises of a life and a future, and they weren't. But he did a beautiful job. And our family left after a little while. It was probably about midnight by then. The share organization came in and they had done some molds of his hands and feet. And I was so tired. And I said to my husband, like, I think we need to pick a time and enjoy him until then. And then we just need to be okay to let him go. Like, I think we just need to decide on a time.
Did the hospital have a time limit per se? Do you know if they did or not?
I think they were trying to have us keep him longer, which in hindsight, that's one of those things that I'm like, maybe we should have done just because I delivered him so late at night.
Yeah. What time did you deliver him?
It was about 8:30.
Okay.
So not like super late,
right?
But
you guys had been in the hospital since the night before.
Right. And we hadn't slept well and we were just emotionally drained.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Maybe in hindsight, I would have kept him a little longer. And I do regret that we didn't have more of Ben's family there.
Is he farther? Are they farther away, or was it just?
I don't know why. I just didn't even think to it. My family just kind of showed up.
Yeah.
Which was great. And I think Ben's family probably just felt like a little more reserved since I was the one having the baby.
Right.
And so I just, in hindsight, I wish I would have thought, but my mind was a million other places.
Yeah.
Especially for the blessing, I wish that we had thought to invite some of his brothers.
Right.
But once again, like, I don't know. I guess I just didn't even think about the process after. And it was just kind of like happening as it did. And it was that, you know?
Yeah.
So I had said, what if the mortuary comes and gets him at 2 a.m.? And the nurse was like, what if we call him at 2 a.m. and it will take about an hour for them to get here once we call them?
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, that's fine. So we spent time together. We held him. We got to get him dressed. And I couldn't even keep my eyes open. And my husband kept saying, like, just stay awake. And I was like, let me sleep for like a half an hour. And so Ben just held Tommy for that time. We never put him down the whole time we had him. They brought in like a cooling bed to preserve his body, but we never used it because we thought, like, if we're gonna have him, we want to hold him. And by now his body was starting to like change and his skin was super fragile and his coloring didn't look good, and it made it harder and harder to see him like that. Yeah. And so my husband woke me up about a half an hour before the mortuary came, and I held him one last time and like tried to memorize every little feature of his face and smell him and like remember what his body felt like against mine. And the mortuary came and I was really dreading that just because I thought, like, I can't imagine what it's going to feel like to hand my baby over to this stranger. Yeah. So the mortuary came and our nurses were just, I mean, they were top notch. They were so great. And so when I sang him "You Are My Sunshine," which is what I always sing to my kids. I sang him that song before I handed him over, and the nurse said she would take him from me. So I handed him over to the nurse who had been just so wonderful through the whole thing, and they went out of the room. So I never even saw that exchange, which I was really grateful for. Yeah. Because this guy, bless his heart, he wasn't their A team. And he kind of even kept, well, not kind of, he kept referring to Tommy as a she. Oh. And I can remember thinking, like, I'm supposed to send my baby with this person that doesn't even know he's a boy. Like, yeah. And so I really appreciated that our cute nurse did that for me. So I didn't have to, because I didn't know how I could physically do that. So my doctor was awesome. He's like, the next day we'll get you out first thing in the morning so you don't have to stay here, which we really appreciated. Like the hospital and even the nurses were great. They brought in a recovery room to labor and delivery. So I never even got moved over to recovery.
Oh, that's so nice.
It was so nice.
That's so nice.
We were super lucky. We were the only ones there that day delivering. So there were a lot of like tender mercies woven into a really crappy,
terrible situation.
Yeah. And so they let us stay over in labor and delivery. And then the next morning they released me and we came home, and we'd had family that had come and like cleaned our house and filled our fridge with freezer meals. And I had a counter full of groceries and gifts for our kids and just really thoughtful things. And it wasn't the things of any of it. It was just, we felt so grateful for all the people that were aware of us. And by that morning we had posted on Instagram what had happened. And I feel bad. I was going through my phone just last night and I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many text messages I never responded to. But the day I delivered Tommy, I had a friend come to the hospital who she's lost her daughter, and she said like, you're going to get a million texts. You don't have to respond. And I think that was like the greatest piece of advice I got.
The little bit of permission to not stress about that.
Yeah. Cause it was like overwhelming, the people that were reaching out to us, like overwhelming in the best way imaginable. But like it's all we would have done if we would have been responding to texts. So we were so blessed to have so many incredible people reaching out to us over the next couple of days. And we drew so much strength from that. I mean, it's really what got us through. So a couple days later, we went to the funeral home and made all the arrangements, which was
so weird, isn't it?
So weird. And just like picking out his caskets, and they were like, oh, come in here and we'll show you. And they opened like this little armoire, and it's like, oh my gosh, the caskets fit in like this china hutch. Like it just was so heartbreaking to think of it. And we did get to the funeral home and we started to make arrangements, and the funeral director was really sweet. And we started like making some decisions, and he's like, oh, I just wanted you to know that the funeral's been anonymously donated, and the people who paid for it didn't want you to make any decisions based off of finances. They just wanted you to do like emotionally what you wanted to do, which we were really grateful for, because funerals are not cheap, and it was hard not to allow finances to be part of these decisions, but they were such big decisions. So we ended up buying him an adult plot, and we bought ours next to his, and it's brought me a lot of peace knowing that like someday
you'll be together.
Yeah, I'll physically be with him again. And like, because we had kind of talked about the Babyland area, and I loved the idea of it for so many reasons, but I was like, selfishly, I want to know that I'm going to be where he is. Like, and so that's brought me a lot of peace through this process, is knowing like, okay, we'll get there.
Yep.
Hopefully not for a long time.
And for those who, when you reference Babyland, that was kind of just an area in a lot of cemeteries, I think, that are just for little, stillborn babies or infant deaths and that type of thing. So,
and it's crazy because the little plots are so small.
They're tiny.
And so they do cost quite a bit less than an adult plot, which was like our biggest hang up.
Yeah.
So we did a really small service. We only invited our siblings, which when I say only, Ben's from a family of 10 and I'm from a family of 7. So that was a lot of people. But yeah, we just invited siblings and a couple really close friends. And Ben and I spoke, and his friend's an incredibly talented pianist. He played a beautiful arrangement, and we buried him that day. It was...
How many days was that after?
About 6.
Okay.
Yeah, that was another thing. We had kind of thought about doing it sooner, but it felt like really rushed. And I was like, I not that I enjoy it, but I don't want it to feel like we rushed through this experience or process. So it was a really beautiful day for January, which I hate January. I hated it before this. Now I really hate it. But we had a really beautiful day, and it was surreal on so many levels to be sitting on the front row of a funeral. But we felt really blessed that day for the good people around us. And Ben has a lot of family out of state, and they made big sacrifices to be there with us, which we'd kind of been like, it's fine. Like, you don't need to come. But they made a lot of sacrifices to be there, and that meant a lot to Ben and I. And we did a luncheon at my sister's house that was really low key, and it was really beautiful. And it was weird the next day that it's like, now what?
Yeah.
Like, it had been all these things and like getting through the funeral. And then it was just like, I think that next day was probably the hardest day, when it was just like this big letdown.
Yeah.
And then in a lot of ways it was nice.
Right.
That, like, you're through
all of
the hard
that
stuff. But then it was just like, what do we even do with ourselves now? And I've heard a lot of people that experience loss say that, like, the hard part comes after the funeral. And it's so true. Like, life goes back to normal for everyone else, and you have this life you never dreamed of having.
Yep.
And you have to figure it out. So yeah, that's our story.
A couple questions I wanted to ask. Did you dress Tommy? Did you in the funeral home? Like, were you able to do that, or?
Yeah. And something I haven't talked about a lot. I'm pretty open with my story on Instagram, but something I haven't talked much about is they had said, like, his skin was really fragile.
Yeah.
And it tore quite a bit. And so a lot of his body was covered in like honestly, I would describe it as saran wrap.
Yeah.
Like, they probably have like some medical term for it, but that's like exactly what it felt like. And it was just like another punch in the gut. Like, it just made me so sad. And like holding his body, and it was so cold. And so it felt really therapeutic to dress him. And I dressed him in a little hand-me-down from Winnie. It was just a little white Gap sleeper, but I thought, like, there's a lot of things in life Tommy won't ever get to do, but like, he does get to wear a hand-me-down. So I loved that it was a hand-me-down.
That's great.
And our kids had picked, I had said, like, do you guys want to put anything in the casket with Tommy? And Winnie picked her binky, which was like her prized possession.
Oh.
And that's what she gave Tommy. And Connor gave him a little car that he had gotten. Actually, when Winnie was born, Ben's parents had brought it to him as like a, sorry, you're not the baby anymore gift. And that is what he picked to give Tommy. And so it was really sweet. And Ben was cute. He picked rocks from our yard. Oh. That our kids love to play with. Yeah. And that's what he wanted to put in. And I had wrote just a little note. And so we had invited our parents to put something in. And then they were in the room when we closed the casket, just us and our parents, which was really hard. Like, I kind of hadn't thought about that part of it, but it just felt so final. Yeah. To like close the casket.
Close it and seal it up. And
yeah,
it's final.
Yeah. In like the most heartbreaking way.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
Well, you've been there too. It's the worst.
Yeah, it really is the worst. But thank you for sharing that. That was, of course, beautiful. Actually, I was going to ask, how much did he weigh?
He weighed like 6 pounds and I think about 1 ounce, and he was 17 inches. So for 36 weeks,
he was
good size.
He was a really good little size there.
Yeah. And when we delivered him, there were no indications of like a cord problem. The placenta looked really healthy. They did a biopsy of my placenta that came back normal. We opted not to do an autopsy. Yeah. We felt like it wouldn't change anything, and I kind of couldn't stand the thought of like putting his body
through that.
Yeah. And truthfully, I've wondered if it did have anything to do with my clot or all the medication I required, and I didn't know if I could live like with the medical reinforcement that something I did
caused.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the placenta looked good and everything else. Did your doctor have any thoughts on what had happened?
Not a clue.
Okay.
He said like the stress test looked good.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were no obvious indicators.
Oh, that's hard.
Yeah.
Because it's like, do you want to find out or do you not want to find out? Because there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
Right.
And I guess here we are almost a year later, and I wouldn't say I've ever thought, I just wish I knew.
Oh, really?
Mm-mm. I've felt a lot of peace.
Okay.
With our decision. I think there are other things, like I mentioned, that I wish we would have done a little bit differently. But as far as an autopsy, I felt a lot of peace with that decision.
Not doing that.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm grateful for.
Yeah. That's good. Is there anything else you want to tell us about Tommy? Something you want to remember about him?
I guess I would just say I feel like when we lost Tommy, I feel like he gave me like a new lease on life, which I guess sounds kind of corny. But I've just felt like there's so many things that he doesn't get to do in this world that I've just felt a sense of living life for him. And we had kind of just marked this year off thinking like, oh, we'll have a new baby. We'll be pretty tied to home. And then when that didn't happen, I feel like we were like, okay, let's travel. Let's do the things we want to do because tomorrow isn't promised. And I am not a fitness person, but I ran a half marathon this summer and I felt like every run, I thought like, I can run this. Tommy couldn't, but I can do this. And I've thought that like when we've traveled or even just like seeing things in my kids, I've really appreciated the insight he's brought into my life of what a gift it is to live life. And I've thought what happened to us was the worst thing possible. And it's so sad. And I hate that this is our story, but I'm not going to let it define us in a really tragic way. Like I want to take Tommy's life and honor it by doing all the things and appreciating my ability to do it. And so I feel like when I get to do things in life, it's because of him. And I'm so grateful that he gave me that gift because I genuinely feel like it's a gift he gave me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting us tell our story. It feels so good to share him with the world.
Yeah. Many thanks to Brooke for sharing that wonderful story of Tommy with us. Head over to our website, stillapartofus.com, where you can find the show notes, including a full transcript of this interview and any resources that were mentioned, where you can sign up for a short and helpful email newsletter, where you can learn how you can become a patron and support the work it takes to produce this show for just a few dollars a month, and lastly, where you can find out how to get in touch with us if you want to share your child's story on the show. The show is produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song, Flickering Flame. You can find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us.
Never follow anyone else's path, unless if you're in the woods and you're lost and you see a path, then by all means follow that path. Ellen DeGeneres.